Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Hey, greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Dives and Al ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This week is December 4th, 2022, episode 36 coming at you. We have a special guest here. Jim Bennett is our co-host today. We're glad to have him. This week we're going to be discussing the Colorado LDS shooting aftermath, the giant golden Joseph Smith statue unveiled in India, Stanford Mocks Mormons during BYU football game halftime show, and BYU Idaho has puzzlingly fired professors. So we got a lot of news this week that's kind of covering the last 2 weeks because we took the week of Thanksgiving off, but we are back. Welcome back, Dives.
Hey, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'd like to welcome Jim Bennett. Welcome to the Mormon News Roundup, Jim.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity.
Hey, we're thrilled to have you here. I loved you in the Home Teachers movie. Hopefully you're still getting a huge royalty check from that film.
I made $200 for 2 days' work. And,
not bad.
The movie's bad, but the money was fine. The guy
I wasn't going to say anything.
Yeah, that's all right. Well, the director was in my ward, and he came up to me at Elders Quorum once and said, "Hey, Jim, I've got a part for you in my next movie. It's a total burnout. You're perfect for it." So, take that for what you will. It was a lot of fun. I had a great time.
Well, you parlayed that into a very successful political career, so I see that it was the stepping stone towards something great.
Well, I've run for office 3 times and lost 3 times, so if that's a successful political career, I'd hate to see what a failed political career would look like.
Now, I guess you're probably the best known for your ambitious CS letter response. How do you feel about Jeremy Reynolds' response to your criticisms, and are you going to respond to Jeremy's quote-unquote debunking?
Jeremy and I have talked about it. I've gotten to know Jeremy, and I like Jeremy, and I consider Jeremy a friend. I started going through his debunking of my debunking, and it started to feel like going through the fine print on a mortgage loan. It was just so reductive and so in the weeds that what I did was write an overview of my response to his debunking. And he tells me he's put that on his site. I haven't gone to look. I'm not particularly interested. If Jeremy wants to have the last word on that, I'm more than welcome to give it to him.
Now, you seem to be one of the only so-called apologists who goes on to, quote-unquote hospital programs to take on the difficult questions, kind of like with Bill Reel or RFM or Reddit, Ask Me Anything, etc. Why is that, and why are you willing to stick your neck out? Where, what is the saying? Where angels fear to tread.
Yeah, wise men going, fools go where angels fear to tread. I am of the opinion. I sort of stumbled into this. I didn't mean to sort of be the guy that goes on all of these podcasts, but I'm of the opinion that we have no choice but to engage with critics and to engage with people, because that's the only way I think that we can help people who are in faith crisis. Staying away from it, we act like we have a choice, and we don't. I think 40 years ago, we had a choice when you didn't have the internet, and you could sort of segment these discussions. But now I just feel like this is something that we ought to be doing more of, and I enjoy doing it. I enjoy having fun discussions, and I've enjoyed everybody I've talked to. I've enjoyed Bill Reel. I've enjoyed John DeLynn. I've enjoyed RFM. I consider them friends. And I have a good time doing it.
I'm glad that you do it, Jim, because that's one thing that we really value on this podcast is keeping the discussion going. Because as long as we keep talking with each other, sooner or later we're going to come to an understanding. But it's when we stop talking that then the problems arise. So how do you feel like the conversation is going with all of these things?
It's fascinating to me because I get messages from people who say very nice things. And after I first published my reply to the CES letter, all of them came from faithful members of the church. Since I started talking to Bill Reel and John DeLynn, I've gotten flooded with comments from people who have left the church. And they don't say, hey, Jim, you've convinced me to go back to church. But what they say is, you've helped me to understand my family and friends who are still in. And I take that as a huge win. I'm really grateful for that. And I have made a lot of wonderful friends of people in the, I don't know, what's the proper term, the Exmo community?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to call it.
The best way to call it. But I really feel like I don't remember making a covenant to treat people who leave the church like garbage. And there are so many people that have decided that's the best way to deal with people who leave the church that I think it's a real problem. And I want to model better behavior than that.
I prefer to call it the Great and Spacious Building. That's just
Great and Spacious Building. Okay.
That's just me.
That works.
Yeah, well, Jim, I really applaud your efforts, and I appreciate the attitude that you have, because I think that's going to fit in very well with the approach that we take with this podcast.
So, is there anything else, Jim, in your personal beliefs or religious background you want to share before we get started?
I believe that William Shakespeare was the pseudonym of Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. There you go.
But what does that have to, how does that reflect on your personal beliefs or religious background?
That's our personal belief. You asked if there's something I want people to know. That's what I want people to know.
Yeah. Good answer, I think.
That's how, I guess that's how apologists approach everything, right? Just very literal.
Well, it's better than saying it was Walter Raleigh. So.
No, it wasn't Walter Raleigh.
No.
I just want to share one quick story with you, Jim. I know your father was Senator Bob Bennett, who was a longtime Utah senator, and he was my senator for a number of years. And I served a full-time mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints while he was a senator in Washington, D.C. And one of the ward members that I was in a particular ward in Northern Virginia. One of the ward members was a big-time lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and he said, hey, elders, you want to spend your preparation day and go visit the Capitol building? I'll give you an all-access pass. We'll show you under the tunnels, and I'll show you around. I thought, wow, this is fabulous. And so we did. This was a big-time lobbyist guy. And you know what? Unbeknownst to us, he set up an appointment with Senator Bennett, and we got to spend 5 minutes with your father in his office in the Capitol building. I'm sure he's an extremely busy man, but he took time out of his schedule to meet with us, and we let him know that we're his constituents. And I just thought it was very generous of him, and it's always a treasured memory.
Oh, I appreciate that. I love hearing great things about my dad. He was one of the good ones.
Sure was. Now,
Yes,
I understand you got the Mormon News Joke of the Week, right, Jim?
Oh, crud. I completely forgot. Okay, no, I have one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So it's the BYU U of U football game, and the guy from the U of U is sitting in front of the guy from BYU, and he's cheering and jumping up and down and screaming. And the guy from BYU says, hey, can you sit down? You're blocking my vision. And the U of U guy turns and says, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were having one.
Well played.
Oh boy, that's good. That's excellent.
All right.
Just a couple last notes here before we get into this week's news articles. We released the I did an interview with the Art of Floundering podcast last week, which we released over Thanksgiving. So if you haven't gone back, I'd encourage you to do that. And I also went on a church history tour. We took a family vacation over Thanksgiving, and we spent quite a bit of time up there in Palmyra and got to visit the print shop and the Joseph Smith frame house, and we got to visit all the sites, the temple up there, and all kinds of different things. And it was a really fascinating trip. I've never been there before. And I want to give props to Elder Smith, who was at the Grandin print shop. He was a family favorite. I thought he did a fantastic job. He gave our family, all 5 of us, a mini tour. And I was thrilled by his rendition and his tour. One amusing anecdote I want to share is my son, when we were at the Hill Cumorah, we climbed all the way to the top, and he said, Dad, how come we haven't found that cement box that held the Book of Mormon? Has anybody looked for that? And I just kind of looked at him and said, that's a good question, son. I wonder about that. But we had a good time about it.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun.
It was.
Yeah, I'm glad you had a good time. Well, are we ready to get to it?
You bet.
All right, I'm going to head up with our first article for the week. This one comes from lbc.co.uk, and this is from the 24th of November of this month. This is a little bit of a review of what happened the week of Thanksgiving. The title of the article is "Porn Star Meth Addict Dad of Alleged LGBT Club Killer is, quote, relieved that his son is not gay," and says that, quote, "violence works." This is by Kit Herron. This article is... There's also a link in the show notes to, let's see, TikTok is the format, where you have a little clip of the interview with the dad. And boy, yeah, this guy, you can see the effects that methamphetamines has had on him. It's really rough. Let's see. The father is Aaron Brink of Anderson Lee Aldrich, was the name of the shooter, and said that his son was... he confirms that he raises his son LDS, that he was raised Mormon, but when he found out that his son was there in the club, he said, "Oh no, is my son gay?" And then he was relieved to find out, oh, he's just the shooter. He's not homosexual, because that was his number one concern. And I really thought that was in poor taste. But then again, what do you expect from somebody that raises someone that thinks it's okay to go and act out violently towards others that they don't agree with? So, what are you guys' thoughts about this whole incident? Jim?
Well, I was, Calvin Burke on Twitter announced that he was a Mormon, and all of these defenders of the church came out of the woodwork and said, you can't blame him, he was inactive, this had nothing to do with it. People referenced Jeffrey R. Holland's musket fire talk, and I'm actually less concerned about the musket fire talk as I am about the growing, fermenting underbelly of Mormonism that is described by the hashtag Desnat on Twitter.
Yeah.
You have a bunch of white nationalists that are using the church as the platform, that Twitter's cracked down on them to some degree, but they used to post all these pictures of Brigham Young brandishing machine guns, and machetes were their icon of choice. And there is... I don't think the general membership of the church is in any way violent, but I think that there are enough extremists in the church that something like this at some point was inevitable. And I would like to see Salt Lake City cracking down and calling it out by name.
Certainly.
Rather than just sort of waving it away and saying, oh, this isn't really a problem.
Yeah. By comparison, I've been considering, what happened after 9/11 with the Muslim faith, is that you had Al-Qaeda, that was a fringe element of the religion of Islam, that was blamed for terrorism and these kinds of terrorist attacks. And there was a big call for Muslims to in effect, rein in these fringe elements and to take a stand against them. And I mean, I myself at the time said, hey, these people are going out there representing their religious beliefs. So if the religion really is a religion of peace, then that religion needs to crack down hard on it. So by comparison, I would say I completely agree with you, Jim, that this is something where Salt Lake City, if they want to be considered a peaceful religion, needs to really come down on the Desnat and not fundamentalists. That's not the word. It's more the extreme factions like this, like where you got the extreme right wing that is using their religion as an excuse for violence. Yes. So I completely agree with you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Citing safety concerns, the church apparently canceled some of the LDS Colorado events in the following week, just to ensure that there was no retaliation or no other violent events. And I think I'm the one who, quote unquote, broke this story, is that Elder Holland's Facebook page. You referenced the so-called musket fire talk there, Jim. The church has shut down his Facebook page entirely for a period of almost 24 hours immediately following this LDS Colorado event back on, I think it was November 27th. And I think that they probably did that because there was an accumulating, I don't know for sure, but maybe an accumulating amount of negative comments that were posted to his personal page. I can't confirm that to be sure. But
yeah,
would not surprise me in the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that musket fire talk got spread around a lot. And yeah, I mean, it was probably poor taste for Elder Holland to give that talk a year ago, but I don't think that had anything to do with the actions of this young man. No.
Yeah,
I don't either. I mean, I don't think there's any direct linkage. I just think that we are too comfortable allowing violent rhetoric to percolate and fester on the fringes of the church. And I think this is a wake-up call to say, you know what, sometimes this rhetoric can boil over, and we ought to be careful about it, and we ought to call it out.
Yeah. Well said.
Well, I mean, I also asked this. We discussed this we discussed this a couple of times with gun shootings, that the church is not currently leading nationally or internationally on gun rights or gun violence. They do enter the fray when it comes to immigration on some political issues. They enter it on same-sex marriage for sure. They wade into that. And, most people would consider gun violence to be a moral issue. In fact, probably one of the biggest moral issues of our time. But the church is not showing any leadership on that. And they certainly could be doing much, much more than they are.
Well, President Nelson at one point said that we need to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them, which made a certain segment of the church apoplectic. But I used to write editorials for the Deseret News. And the goal of a Deseret News editorial is to offend the least amount of people possible.
That sounds right.
Something very milquetoast, very pablum, because they're afraid that anything they write is going to be taken as the position of the church. But there are specific issues, the ones you described, immigration being one, as well as same-sex marriage, that the church feels very comfortable leading out on. But if the church hasn't given clear direction, we weren't allowed to write an editorial that said much of anything. And everything was just kind of couched in very cautious language. And I think the church is just timid about leading out on those kinds of issues. And I wish they weren't.
Yeah, so let me ask you, Al. How do we rein in the right-wing fringe elements in the church? How do we bring the Desnats? How do we control those? How do we, Mr. Brink here? I would call him pretty far right-wing. How do we control those individuals and correct what we have here?
Yeah, because it sounds to me like from what we've seen with activism within the church is that the church really does seem to have more of a problem, just like Mr. Brink said, more of a problem with people's sexual orientation than with their violent behavior. And that seems really backwards. So I think that there is a way to approach that. And the way to approach that is definitely across the pulpit at General Conference officially. It's something that the church needs to come out very strongly publicly against it, so that there's no, this isn't something that can be taking on a local level. You can't just put it out on a fifth Sunday and say, look, we this Sunday, for the fifth Sunday, we need to make sure all of our Sunday school lessons are about resisting violence and not committing murder in the name of the church. So I don't think that would be a strong enough stance. I think that the only way that the type of people that would commit this kind of atrocity are going to believe the church's word for it is to go where that is official, and that is General Conference. What are your thoughts?
Jim, do you have any last thoughts on this Colorado shooting?
I would love to see the church take this kind of thing head on, and I don't see it happening.
Unfortunately, no. Yeah.
This podcast is brought to you by our friends over at Signature Books, www.signaturebooks.com. We invite you to check out their latest book written by Romney Burke, which is entitled Susie Young Gates, Daughter of Mormonism.
Brigham Young had over 50 wives and 56 children, but none has better name recognition than daughter Susie Young Gates. She lived from 1856 and died in 1933. Yet she, like so many women of Mormonism's past, has remained a mystery to most church members. In Susie Young Gates, Romney Burke, the author, paints a portrait of a strong woman who rose to prominence within the church, fought for the rights of women throughout the country, yet dealt with personal trials and her share of heartbreak.
Yep, that does take us to our next article. I agree with you, Jim. Our next article here is BYU football team. First of all, it's kind of a two-parter. BYU football team, it wins the last two games of the season. Now they're 7-5. They will be going to an ESPN bowl game, which apparently will be announced here perhaps as soon as this afternoon. But that's a big deal. There's a lot of eyeballs on this BYU football team. More people watch BYU football than general conference and state conferences. If you add up
I
every
believe
single
that.
state conference and all the general conference viewership and the young adult devotionals and the rest, every single thing that comes out of Salt Lake City, BYU football game for the whole season, much more people watch that. So, yeah, they're probably going to a bowl game. But what I wanted to discuss actually was the Stanford game, which was not this last game, but the week before. And there's a lot of controversy here. This was an article written on the Daily Universe, BYU's own newspaper. This was November 27, 2022. Title of the article is Stanford band stages controversial halftime skit during football game against BYU. So if you look at the picture here, Al, can you describe the picture of what took place during this halftime of this football game in Stanford with the BYU football team?
Yeah, this was what this was like a marriage ceremony between non-straight people, and they basically went. What happened is, and Stanford University has a reputation for doing these kinds of controversial halftime shows. So they did a non heterosexual marriage using the terminology that's used in the LDS temple ceilings, and the officiator is definitely not a priesthood holder. It is a female. So this is something that was definitely done in poor taste, and shouldn't have happened. But at the same time, I don't think that this is just a singling out of the LDS. I think this is something that Stanford has done, and maybe they've gone too far. Maybe this is something that is inappropriate regardless of who you're doing it about, right?
Let me ask you, Jim, was this halftime show, is it in poor taste? Is it bigotry? Is it hate speech? Is it much ado about nothing?
I would go with much ado about nothing. I think it was, if you weren't a member of the church, you wouldn't be able to notice that they were aiming this at the church. They used the phrase "for time and all eternity," and they did something else that was Mormon. But if you weren't a Mormon or you aren't Mormon adjacent, you wouldn't have noticed. And to call it bigotry or hate speech is just a massive overreaction. I mean, the church entered into the public arena on the issue of same-sex marriage in California, where Stanford is, and Stanford bore the brunt of it to a large degree. And I think it's fair game for them to poke back, and for us to just get all upset and offended and, choosing to be offended, to use the phrase. I think that's really kind of a silly response. I think you just let it go, roll your eyes a little bit, and off you go.
It might have been better to respond with the Stanford prison experiment, that whole debacle back in the 70s. To say, hey, out of Stanford, you get some pretty extreme things.
Yeah, the Stanford has come out after that. They said that the Stanford Athletics has said, this is an article in the Deseret News, that it deeply regrets the offense caused by the band's halftime show. And the Stanford Athletic Department addressed the halftime show performance during its football game and said that this doesn't reflect our values. It does not reflect the values of religious freedom, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. And it just makes me think, well, if they were mocking, I don't know, if they were mocking black people, if they were mocking gay people, if they were mocking trans people, there would be a complete outrage. And it would be not tolerated. And I can almost guarantee you this, that if they had mocked one of those groups that I just mentioned, that there would have been some discipline that would have been handed out for the students involved. But because it's Latter-day Saints, and because the church has, as you said, waded into it in Proposition 8, and we're on, the team is in an away game, then everything's fair game. Even if somebody holds something sacred, well, then you can just run over it with the truck.
No, but they're not mocking Latter-day Saints. They're taking issue with a Latter-day Saint position. They're not mocking any individuals.
True.
I mean, I mean, they're not saying Mormons are idiots, Mormons are ugly, Mormons. I mean, they're not attacking anybody who's a member of the church.
Yeah,
They
they're
are,
kind of lampooning, if you will, a practice or an ordinance, right?
yes,
Yeah.
that's what they're doing. And when you enter the public arena, that's something that you have to expect. You wouldn't say somebody in a political situation who's taking issue with Republicans is attacking Republicans as individuals if they're attacking a Republican policy. And I think that's exactly what they were doing here. I think it's a little childish and silly, but to call it hate speech, to call it all of that, I just think that's making far too much of a situation that doesn't deserve that attention.
Well, it reminds me back of when BYU volleyball team had the so-called racist incident against Duke. When that happened, there was literally a police investigation in it. There was discipline for a UVU student who was attending the volleyball game, even though there was no evidence of it. BYU reacted extremely strongly, and it was on CNN. It was carried throughout the entire nation. People were in a complete uproar, even though there was a bunch of smoke and no fire. Now we have what most people would consider to be a fire, and absolutely nothing has happened. And this is also the same thing that happened a couple of weeks ago when BYU football was playing against Oregon. And there was a chant caught on tape by a number of Oregon students who said "F the Mormons." So
Right.
whenever it's BYU, whenever someone comes to visit BYU, there's discipline and there's action taken because BYU wants to do the right thing. Every time that BYU sports goes to travel somewhere else, it's just open season and fair game.
I don't think what happened at the Duke game, or what didn't happen, what was alleged to have happened at the Duke game, is in any way comparable to what happened in the Stanford game. I think it may be comparable to F the Mormons, because F the Mormons is you are attacking individuals for their identity. Marrying two women for time and all eternity. It's just not the same thing. I just do not see the two as analogous at all.
Well, and I don't think that anybody that was there I mean, if this was actually a legitimate marriage, I don't think anybody that's involved in it legitimately believes that they were really being married or sealed together by priesthood power for time and all eternity, right?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
I do have a feeling, though, that BYU is the number 2 anti-LGBTQ university in the nation. I think it's only second behind Liberty University. And as the distance between how BYU approaches LGBTQ issues, how the rest of society approaches it, as those continue to diverge, if they continue to diverge, and they probably will, then I have a feeling that these type of protests, satire, and is just going to become a lot more common.
Oh, I think that's probably very true. And I mean, you can see that in the protests prior to 1978, where the church was very much going divergent from where the rest of the world was. And we eventually came around as a church. But we should expect more of this. And I don't think... I think F the Mormons is hate speech. I think marrying someone for time and all eternity is not.
Yeah, that's a fair thing to say there, Jim. Any other thoughts before we move on to the next article here?
No, absolutely. No, I think we got it covered. Let's go on to our next article here. And this is literally a huge article because it's a giant golden Joseph Smith statue unveiled in India. And Deepak Christopherson tweeted this out on his official handle here. That he said, "I was honored to represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints yesterday at the World Peace Dome in Pune, India. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, as the statue of the Prophet Joseph Smith was added to this majestic hall built to promote world peace." And the Church News also covered this not once, but twice. And Deepak Christopherson said that this is the greatest aspect of the mission of the Prophet Joseph Smith was to bear testimony of Jesus Christ. So we had a very, very memeable, giant 15-foot golden laid statue here with Joseph Smith, and he appears to be holding a book. Maybe it's the Book of Mormon, not sure. But this is really a remarkable thing, and it really kind of took Twitter in particular by a storm.
Yeah, we've seen the statue kind of similar to this of Joseph Smith in different locations. I believe there's one in Palmyra at the Hill Cumorah. I'm not sure. I haven't been there personally, but I know that I've seen a statue similar to this on Temple Square. But it's just kind of, Joseph Smith standing there holding a book with his other hand outstretched. I mean, it's a nice statue, but the church did not commission it. This was something that was done by the people of India. And the church just basically just gives their seal of approval by sending an apostle there to say, yeah, we're okay with this. And
Yeah. So
that's fine.
yeah, Jim, did you see this? What's your reaction to this golden Joseph Smith statue?
Well, it's just too easy to make the comparison to the golden calf, and plenty of people did. In the context of what this statue is and where it is, I think it's actually sort of a lovely gesture on the part of people who are not members of the church, who are trying to create a sort of ecumenical, inclusive, I don't want to say shrine, but I mean, this is one of, I think, 30 or maybe it's even 50 statues of religious
54.
leaders. 54. 54 statues of religious leaders from all across the world and from all kinds of different traditions. And I think it's kind of lovely to be included in that. But the pictures, and it looks like he's wearing some kind of Hawaiian lei. I mean, the pictures just the memes write themselves.
Yeah, too easy. So Joseph Smith here joins 50 other quote unquote. So the World Peace Dome is for messiahs of peace. That it's for a peace. It's kind of in the vein of Gandhi. And I'm just thinking to myself, what did Joseph Smith do to promote world peace? And a couple things come to mind, like the Zion's Camp March. I wouldn't call that too peaceful, or the Danites, the Council of 50, the Missouri War, the Battle of Crooked River, destroying a printing press, the heavy emphasis in the Book of Mormon on war and bloodshed. I don't think any objective reader can read the Book of Mormon and think that it is a book of peace. There is a great deal of battles and death, millions of people dying. And Joseph Smith brandishing pistols in Carthage jail, and he was a 2 or 3-star general in the Nauvoo Legion. I forget which one. I think it was a lieutenant general. That was making him a 3-star general. What did Joseph Smith do to promote world peace? It kind of reminds me of like President Obama when he won the Nobel Peace Prize after only being president for like 9 months. I'm like, wait a minute, he's only been in office for 9 months.
Right.
So I mean, is he a peaceful figure?
Well, I think you're further into the weeds than I would go. Because I think he's not there as an embodiment of his own life specifically. He's there as a symbol of the church as a whole. And anytime it might be more appropriate to have the angel Moroni or something that you couldn't actually attach specific actions or behavior to. But I see it. I see it more as a gesture of inclusion from other religious traditions that have chosen Joseph Smith as the symbol for the church, more than I see it as a celebration of anything peaceful or non-peaceful that Joseph Smith personally ever did.
Yeah. And the irony for me is that Joseph Smith in this dome, he's sharing it with many other religious leaders who were very, very peaceful leaders, especially, like Gandhi. But the thing about it is,
in there?
I don't know. I don't know if
I
Muhammad's
don't
in
know
there.
either,
It's in India. I would be very, very surprised, considering the Hindu nature of India, if Muhammad made it in there.
Muhammad may not have made it in there, but
I would think not, because the religion of Islam is really against there being any kind of image of Muhammad, right? So I think out of respect for that, they probably would have left him out.
Fair point. I had forgotten that. That's absolutely right.
But I just wonder, did anyone in the church's PR department maybe think that this was not the best look? I mean, someone can make a statue all that they want. I mean, there is a couple of weird statues in Salt Lake City of Joseph Smith in those international gardens, for instance. But we didn't send an apostle to support those. So did somebody think, maybe this isn't the best look to have an apostle below a golden calf statue, when so many people out there think that Mormons actually worship Joseph Smith? But maybe someone in the PR department might have caught that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that in terms of PR that was the wisest move. Because again, the memes write themselves, and they, you can go and find this golden statue saying and doing all kinds of things now. Um, uh, but I think in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter one way or the other.
I just do. The irony here is very, very thick because you're making a golden statue out of someone who was dogged by treasure hunting allegations. And
Sure.
remember, he bankrupted a lot of folks with the Kirtland Safety Society scandal back in
Hmm.
was that 1837, and
Yeah.
then he ran up huge debts in Nauvoo before his untimely death. So I just
Hmm.
not only is I don't think that you can say that Joseph Smith is a messiah of peace, and also he's got a lot of money, and especially with the fact that the church. Remember, the church is the number one holder of real estate in the United States and is
Hmm.
probably the most wealthy religion in the U.S. Maybe second according to the Catholic Church. This just, I mean, there's a huge amount of irony in this statue.
Yeah.
Well, I would give Joseph Smith more credit than you're willing to give him. I think the totality of Joseph Smith's life is extraordinarily complex. And yes, you can point to a number of things that are problematic. You can also point to the legacy, which is a thriving religion that has outlived him by several generations, and I believe has blessed the lives of millions of people. And I don't think you can separate the two. I don't think you can isolate all of Joseph Smith's flaws and not acknowledge all of Joseph Smith's positive contributions to the
Hmm.
religious life of his followers and to the religious life of the world as a whole. And I think that that's been if I didn't believe it was an influence for good, I would no longer be a member of the church.
For
So
sure.
we have to come to terms with Joseph Smith, the flawed human being.
Hmm.
But I don't think we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Joseph Smith probably wasn't all that great with money, as evidenced by the Kirtland
Sure.
Banking Society. Brigham Young, on the other hand, his successor,
Yeah,
was great with money, and I think
sure.
that that's where you start to see the real growth and the headway being made. That I think there was a lot of the what business savvy mindset of Brigham Young that got passed down from generation to generation, whereas a lot of uh, the religious doctrines or teachings of Joseph Smith were handed down.
Yeah, I mean,
And that's what described.
I
Hmm.
live here in Virginia. You know, that's considered we're in the Confederate States, formerly Confederate states here, and where there's been a big push in the last couple of years to tear down the statues of Confederate generals and rename the highways of racist owners of enslaved persons. And that's why people, I look, when you make a statue, it's not just that you're commemorating what he stood for, you're also commemorating what he did. And should you be making a statue that to honor the man, especially what we know about Joseph Smith and polygamy now, especially with young girls? Should we be making a statue which basically it's not just about the religion that he founded; it's about him as a person? Should we be making a statue to honor Joseph Smith, considering especially what we know about his polygamy with young girls?
Well, we didn't make the statue. Uh, we
Or
didn't. I mean,
send an official
okay,
representative.
but I think in terms of endorsement and participation in that process, that is several steps removed from making a 50-foot golden statue of Joseph Smith, or 15 foot.
Okay.
Uh, I mean, we accepted the honor and probably did so in a clumsy way. But this was something that was done by somebody outside the church in order to celebrate the church as a whole more than to celebrate Joseph Smith as a person.
Hmm.
And as such, I don't see anything particularly wrong with it.
Okay.
Well,
That's
to our
fair.
listeners out there, this goes along with our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. If you come on over to Anchor, you can take our poll. And Jim, if you would be so kind, we'd like you to take our poll too regarding this. And Al, what is the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week?
Okay, so the question on the poll this week is: how do you feel about the oversized Golden Joseph Smith statue unveiled in India last week?
Okay, and Jim, if you don't mind, could you read us number one?
All right, I'm pulling it up here on my Google Doc. You caught me flat-footed. Here it
Sorry,
is.
it's down towards the bottom.
Well, we
That's
like
all
to
right.
do a lot of gotcha questions. We like to set people up with a kind of a gotcha questions here. You probably noticed the pattern.
Yeah, it's all right. Okay, so Fred, we're okay. Okay, how do you feel about the oversized golden Joseph Smith statue unveiled in India this week? Number one, 2 thumbs way up. Millions shall know golden Joseph again.
I was really hoping, since you're a second tenor or a first tenor, Jim. Is
Second
that?
tenor.
Oh, I was hoping you would sing it. I'm certainly not going to force you
Millions shall know golden Joseph.
Lovely.
That is perfect.
Asking ye shall receive.
Hey, this is a dream come true. I'm
Yeah.
remembering back to your father in his office. He never would have thought that this conversation would have taken place. I can guarantee you that.
Well,
Or how about, is it number 2?
number 2, weirded out. Moroni said Joseph's name shall be known for good and evil, not for gold and silver.
You have to admit, Al, that it is a bit weird, right?
I do have to admit that, yeah.
Yeah. Or is it number 3?
Number 3, ironic. The children of Israel and Aaron want their golden calf statue back.
Yeah. What command is one of the 10 commandments? Is not make a graven image. What is that? Commandment 2, Al? Do you remember? Or
Let's see. It is.
It
I
is
don't know,
number 2.
Yeah, it's number 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, number 2. Or number 4, Jim.
Number 4, this gaudy statue is the perfect symbol of the most wealthy church in American history.
That's slightly debatable, but it's somewhere right up there, and that's of course a lot of irony there. Or maybe you feel it's number 5.
Number 5, no problem. As long as no one calls him a Mormon, it's all good.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most important thing here. We don't want any victories for Satan. Or is it number 6?
Number 6, the statue is impressive, but they need to surround it with 33 more golden statues of his wives. #forever families.
That would be, yeah, he's surrounded by 54 leaders, messiahs of peace, but I think it'd be a lot more impressive if he was surrounded by 33 gold.
I'm curious if Joseph Smith's the only polygamist in that in these statues.
I don't know. India, I think there's a lot of polygamists in India. I don't know for a fact. Could be, not sure. Yeah. Or finally, number 7.
Number 7, somewhere in heaven, Josiah Stoll's sons are screaming, "See, I told you so."
Yeah, the Josiah Stoll's sons, they are furious. Oh, boy, they are. I guess they're vindicated. So this is an imperfect poll here, Jim, but which one of these, is there any of these which one is the closest to how you feel about
probably number 5, no problem, as long as no one calls him a Mormon, and I don't even care if they call him a Mormon.
Okay, so you're not too worried
I just don't, I mean, I think it's odd. It's a little weird, but we didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, this was a gesture including Mormons in the world community of religion, and as such, I welcome it.
Mm-hmm.
You betcha.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind everybody to please drop us a like, drop us a subscription. We'd be very grateful for that. Leave us a 5-star review. We'd be very, very grateful for that. Now, this next article here was the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square revises the mission to reflect LDS Church's global membership. So there's a lot going on in the choir. They've got a new president, Mike Lovett. They've gone through a lot of new exciting changes. They have a new name. President Nelson has refined the mission. The tours are changing. There's a supposed emphasis on diversity. Jim, what's going on with the choir?
It's been really exciting, actually. Mike Leavitt, as people know, he's the former governor of Utah. He was Secretary of Health and Human Services for the Bush administration. He is a mover and a shaker, and they called him to be the choir president. And he hit the ground running, and the expansion of the mission is the addition of 3 additional words to the official choir mission. And those words are throughout the world. And the idea is we are going to make the choir have a broader global impact. And they gathered the choir together and announced this to choir members before they announced it to the world at large. But there were 3 different initiatives that they're talking about. One is they're going to make music in the spoken word in both Spanish and Portuguese. They're still going to use the same music, and we're not going to sing different languages, although we are going to sing some songs that have different languages. We've already done that a little bit. But there's going to be a native speaker of both Spanish and Portuguese doing the spoken word for Spanish and Portuguese populations. So that was number 1. Number 2 was that we're going to focus on smaller tours in places but more frequent tours, Right now, we've been going on tour every 2 years. I still haven't ever gone on tour because it kept getting canceled because of COVID. And I was mad because the last tour was supposed to go to Scotland, which is where I served my mission, and I haven't been back in 30 years. But
that's a shame.
Our next tour is going to be 6 days in Mexico City this summer, whereas the previous tours were 3 weeks long, and then they were only every other year. And they're talking about doing multiple tours just to get the choir out there and to get the choir out in the world. And they want to do it in places that have a strong Latter-day Saint presence. And the third is that they're going to bring in people from across the world to increase choir diversity. And they're going to, for this next general conference, that we're going to have 20 people from different countries, and they're going to come and perform with the choir. And when he announced this, President Leavitt said, this may be a one-time thing. This may be a practice that we do every conference, or this may be the beginning of something much larger. And I hope it's the beginning of something much larger. And I believe it probably is. So I'm very excited. The choir is being very ambitious, and I'm thrilled to be a part of it. Singing in the choir is one of the great joys of my life.
Now, do you think this emphasis on diversity is actually going to happen?
I know it's going to happen. It's not going to happen to the extent that I think a lot of people will be happy with it, because the people that we're going to bring in from other countries are not going to be here permanently. So on a weekly basis, you're stuck with people who live within 100 miles of Temple Square. And the reality of that is that most of those are pasty white people like me. There's only so much.
Like all three of us.
Like all three of us. I mean, I've seen more diversity in my short time in the choir. I joined in 2019, and they have had more people of color join, and I think they're actively trying to recruit more people of color. But they want to go beyond that. They're not just interested in appearance. They're interested in actual cultural diversity of people from other nations, and that's kind of exciting. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. It's difficult to do that given the choir's weekly broadcast schedule. But, during one general conference, we ended the conference with a video of choirs singing all over the world. And technology is getting to the point where that's becoming easier and easier to do. And so I think that President Leavitt is very eager to sort of push the envelope as to what's possible in creating a more global choir.
Yeah, I used to, Mike Leavitt used to be in my ward in Salt Lake City. I used to play over at his son's house. Actually, his son is named Michael Jr. I used to play over at his son's house all the time. I think he's a fantastic man for the job, is considering his level of leadership, especially at the state level and at the federal level. They obviously found the perfect person for that. Let me just ask you one more question about this before we move on. And how do you feel? And this goes along with our Mormon News Roundup question of the week. If you come on over to Anchor, you can answer this open-ended question. Just want to pose it to you, Jim, before anyone else answers it. And that's, what do you think of the renaming of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir to the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square?
Well, I auditioned for the choir when it was still the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and they made the name change during that process. The whole process takes months, 6 to 9 months. And I received stationery from the Mormon Tabernacle Choir telling me that I had been admitted to the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, even when it was the Tabernacle Choir at Temple Square. I would have, if I were president of the church, I wouldn't have changed the name. I'll just put it that way. I am not president of the church, and I sustain the president of the church, and I accept the name change. I think there's a lot of history in the name. It's a very recognizable name, and I'm kind of sad to have seen it go.
Yeah, to our listeners out there, we'd be interested in hearing from you. We have a website. It's called www.mormonnewsroundup.org. You can come over to our website or you can drop us an email. We're at kolob@mormonnewsroundup.org. That's KOLOB. And we're also on Twitter at @NewsMormon.
Hey everybody, it's D-Vase here. Thanks so much for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast with everything you need all in one place. Allow me to explain. Anchor has the tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. It's everything that you need to make a podcast all in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. So download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
And that does take us to our next article.
Yeah, I'm going to hit up this one. We're going over to onlysky.media, where Hemant Mehta has published an article on November 29, 2022, and it's BYU Idaho may have fired professors for questioning anti-LGBTQ Mormon beliefs. So essentially what happened is up at former Rick's College and currently BYU Idaho, there's been a little bit of a change, by the ECO department. The ECO is the Ecclesiastical Clearance Office. And so basically this is where your ecclesiastical endorsements go through from your bishops. And there's been a couple added questions, just and they're pretty basic and simple. Just, do you have a testimony and or support the church's stance on, the proclamation to the world and the family, which states that marriage is between a man and a woman. And there was a couple of professors up there who, the one is a gentleman by the name of, what's his name? Oh, for heaven's sakes, I'm getting buried in the text here. The other one was Lindsay Larson Call, but it's not her that I'm thinking of. Ben Buswell. Yeah, Ben Buswell. There he is. Okay. So he was having a conversation just at church with his bishop in the hallway, just kind of in passing. And he said, I'm not sure what to think about the whole LGBTQ thing and the church's, stance, hard stance against it. But he says, I'm sure that when I come out on the other side of this, I'll find myself in line with the church's, with where the church stands. So, that's fair. It's essentially what he's saying is, I'm not there yet, but that's the direction that I'm going, and I'm sure that I'm going to end up in that location sooner or later. Well, that bishop, as part of giving him this ecclesiastical endorsement for professors, reported that to the office, said, this is a conversation that we had, and I feel like he's coming the right direction, and he's going to get there. So I endorse him ecclesiastically as an upstanding person that should be remaining on the faculty. The ecclesiastical, the ECO, they didn't feel the same way, so they fired him. They let him go. And the same thing with Lindsay Call. They told, I guess she had made a Facebook post a couple years ago before this whole thing, where she said that she didn't, like where things were, or rather, she was in a training where they showed a video that said, well, mothers are often responsible for the sexuality of their children, and where they end up that way. And she says, I don't think that's right. There's no research behind it. There's nothing to back that up. So I don't think we ought to be showing a video like that, which I think is a fair opinion. But the university went back and found that opinion that she expressed and fired her over it. So essentially what we've got now is I don't want to use the term witch hunt, but I'm going to use the term witch hunt. It's just what it feels like. Is that you've got a bunch of faculty members sitting on pins and needles wondering, okay, is there anything that I might have possibly said anywhere in my past that's not aligning with the current stance of the church.
Yeah, I mean, both of these faculty members passed their ecclesiastical endorsements at the bishop level. They were recommended,
Mhm.
and they don't even know why they were let go. And the most crazy part is they haven't been told the reason that they've been let go. And,
That too.
neither one of these faculty members is out there picketing in the streets. They haven't set up foundations. They're not, lobbying legislation. These are very backroom sort of situations that are they're not fighting directly against the church. They just have some reservations about something seemingly very minor, and they've lost their livelihoods. They've lost their jobs. I'm
Mhm.
extremely concerned if this is the direction that we're going to
Yeah.
see. Jim, did you see this, and what is your reaction?
I did see it, and my reaction is similar to yours. I'm very frustrated that there's no recourse for these people, that they're not able to find out, they're not able to confront their accusers, they're not able to find out why it is that they've been let go. The fact that they cleared their ecclesiastical endorsement means that they should be good to go. And I don't understand. I just don't understand it. I'm frustrated by it, and I want to be as vague as possible, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but I've had some very candid conversations with people who work for the church who are terrified by this.
Sure. There was a second article about this that's also in the show notes for any listener that wants to go check it out, where they did reach out to the church spokesperson for a comment, and the church spokesman said that we may be willing to make a comment, but as of the posting of that article, which was on December 1st, that second one, the church hadn't officially responded. So that's the thing is, we really don't know. You're absolutely right. That's what's hanging in the air is, and furthermore, could it happen to somebody else? We don't know.
Yeah, and just remember, it was only a couple of years ago where Ruthie Robertson, she was a BYU Idaho professor, and she said that she was fired after she wrote in a private, personal Facebook message to someone else that she didn't think that homosexuality was a sin. So, I mean, if you take all these now, we don't know for sure the reasons behind all of these firings. It hasn't been released yet. But if it is regarding what most people are saying that it is, which is that these particular professors were not upholding the church's position strongly enough on LGBTQ issues, that is putting a significant chill on the faculty there at BYU. And as you know, I was a full-time faculty member at BYU for I was, excuse me, a part-time faculty member at BYU Provo for a number of years, and I'm extremely concerned about these reports, and I hope that they are not accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's surprising to see this sort of thing happen, but then again, you really don't see this sort of thing happen at BYU Provo. When you see this sort of thing happen, where it seems a little fringe or out there, it seems like it always comes from BYU Idaho. And I'm guessing that up in Rexburg, they just don't have anything better to do with their time than to get a little out there.
Yeah, I mean, they've added a new question, I think it was a couple of years ago, for faculty members when they're being hired. And the new question, I think, is a little bit, I don't know, I'm a little bit disturbed by it. It says, quote, does this member have a testimony of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and of its doctrine, including its teachings on marriage, family, and gender? Basically, end quote, basically, they're saying, does this person oppose LGBTQ rights and same-sex marriage like the church requires? But this is what is so confusing, is that the church has come out seemingly in favor of the Marriage for All Act. So where is a faculty member then supposed to line? How is a faculty member supposed to interpret all of this information and navigate to be in the good graces of the church? It's seemingly impossible.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, the church's position on LGBTQ issues has in many ways changed radically in a very short period of time. When I was growing up, the miracle of forgiveness was the standard, and it said that Spencer Kimball in that book says that for those who think that this can't be changed, how do you know the door will not open until you've pounded on it until your arms are bloody and your muscles are sore? It can be done. The church now acknowledges that people do not choose their sexual attractions, that now acknowledges that you can't pray the gay away necessarily. I mean, it hedges the language it uses to describe this as some people are successful, but many others are not, and you should not expect that it will change. The church no longer counsels mixed orientation marriages. There are a number of things where the church has taken steps, and now the church has endorsed a bill that makes same-sex marriage the law of the land in all 50 states. So to then say, well, do you support the church's position on marriage, family, and gender? Does the church support the church's position on marriage, family, and gender by taking all those steps?
Depending on where you are in the history timeline, right?
Well, I mean, if I agree that everything that the church has done in that regard that I've just listed is a good thing, am I out of step with the church? And it sounds to me like some of these professors are being told, yeah, you are. You have to really toe a hard line against LGBTQ rights. And it really is very frustrating because so much of this is in flux as we respond to a world that has changed very quickly. People forget that Barack Obama campaigned against gay marriage in 2008 when he ran for president. The shift in terms of public opinion on gay rights is unlike anything any of us have ever seen, because it has happened very quickly and very decisively. And the reality is the church has lost on this issue in every way it is possible to lose.
Yeah.
And so to hold people accountable for having private beliefs about what they want the church to do, or when they're not out there crusading, as you say, then it's really unsettling. And nobody knows where the line is, and everybody's terrified they're going to cross it.
Yeah, and this is from the article here, which is making more mainstream headlines because of you're firing people over academic freedom. And this is from the article here. I want to quote it. It says, not since the American Association of University Professors censured BYU in the late 1990s has the institution faced such a significant threat to academic freedom and its standing as a legitimate institution of higher education. It really erodes the foundation of legitimacy for an institution if you are trying to police people's thoughts, just their thoughts, not actions, thoughts, to such a high level on such an issue in which the rest of the so-called world is in almost unanimous agreement, at least the academic world.
Yep, I think you're right.
Al, do you have anything else on this one?
No, just this is the church is a big ship. Titanic-sized ship, and as we found out in 1912, the Titanic doesn't steer on a dime. It takes a while to turn it. Same with the LDS Church. It's going to take time for the church to turn. And it seems like it's in the middle of that process. It seems like the church is turning, but it's turning so slowly. So, Jim's right that this is kind of a matter of, well, you agree with the church's stance and you support and sustain the church's stance. But that kind of is supposed to change with the changing of the church too. So it's hard to know where you're at, and because it's hard to know where the church is currently at. So that's fair.
Absolutely. Now, if you want to get in touch with us, you can send us a voicemail. If you come on over to Anchor, you can leave us a voicemail, which we'd be happy to play on our next podcast. And we also upload all of these podcasts to YouTube. And this is a final reminder that we also have a Patreon site where we upload some behind the scenes and other articles. We'd love for you to, if you find this podcast enjoyable, come on over, be a subscription, give us a one-time subscription or a monthly subscription. We'd be very grateful. And that does bring us to our final article here, which is published on people.com on December 2nd, 2022 by Brenton Blanchett. And David Archuleta, he is back in the news again. And David Archuleta says that crowd members left his Christmas concert after he spoke about his queer identity. So after the performance, the American Idol alum responded via Instagram to an email accusing him of ruining fans' Christmas experience by speaking about his sexuality on stage. So this took place just a very short amount of time ago. He was doing a concert in Delta, Utah, which I've been to a couple of times. And he talked about his sexuality since he's come out now officially, just in the recent past, that he said that he's officially part of the LGBTQ community, although he's hinted at such quite strongly in the past. Now he's made it official. And after he did that, some people got up, walked out of his performance and criticized him and says, we didn't want to come to a Christmas concert. We wanted to come to a Christmas concert and hear Christmas carols, not be lectured on your sexuality. Jim, were you able to catch this article? What do you think?
Yeah, I was. I think that David Archuleta is extraordinarily brave, and has had to run a gauntlet that very few people will be asked to run, and has navigated the difficulty of his love for his church and his recognition of who he is. And that's an extraordinarily painful thing to do, that those of us who are, boring old heterosexual cisgender folk don't have to do. And the only time I've ever seen David Archuleta in person and singing was at Elder Ballard's wife's funeral. It was a funeral that was attended by all 12 of the Quorum of the 12 and all 3 members of the First Presidency, presided by Russell M. Nelson. And I remember thinking then, because as you say, the hints were fairly strong that this was who he was. And I remember thinking, when he comes out, well, how are these 15 men in this room going to react to it? And we're seeing the answer to that question. I think it's Elder Ballard that David Archuleta, when he mentioned, he says, yeah, I was talking to these apostles, and one of them said, oh, you just need to find a good girl. We just need to find you a good girl. And I thought that, they have a relationship. He's saying at his wife's funeral. I can see him giving them that advice, which I think is, not good advice.
It certainly doesn't fix the problem as much as it causes more problems.
Well, sure. Mm-hmm. And this gets back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this podcast, which is, I don't understand why we feel like we have to treat people who leave like garbage. And it's been amazing to me to watch all of these people who loved David Archuleta when David Archuleta was the poster child for the church. Mm-hmm. And now the instant he says, I've struggled with this for my life, and I've been wrestling with God, and this is what I need to do, and I need to take a step away. And all of a sudden you have all these people who say, ugh, we don't like you, we hate you, we've always hated you, get lost. Mm-hmm. I don't understand. I don't understand that reaction. And I don't understand how you can look at his struggle and his trauma and not feel compassion, not feel empathy, and to go and listen to his concert and say, please put yourself back in the box that you've just come out of. Please, whatever you do, don't make me uncomfortable. Don't show me any part of you that I don't like. Just sing songs, dance, monkey, dance. That's just such a short-sighted reaction to this. Yeah. And I think he deserves better.
Yeah, because he had something to say, and this is part of who he is. And, this is, I think you nailed it on the head there, Jim, that he's not just, dance, monkey, dance. He is a performer. His fan base loves his voice, and I think a lot of his fan bases loved him because he was LDS. But now that he's making changes, there's people that still love to hear the sound of his voice, but, they just, it doesn't really jive with their politics or their religion, the way that he is. But he doesn't want that. He wants to be accepted as he is, for who he is. I mean, he's been through a long journey himself to get acceptance from himself. So now he's looking for that from his fan base. And I can understand people that are going to a Christmas concert not necessarily wanting to get a lecture about somebody's journey to their sexual identification. But at the same time, this is something that's very important to him that he's wanting to share with his fans. And I think he wants to share it with his fans because his fans do matter to him. They are important to him. He wants them to know him for what he is. And in some instances, I think that we, in this world that we live in, are a little too eager to share too much of our sexuality with each other. But I mean, that is a big factor of what makes us who we are. That being said, I don't think the people that left the concert early or sent emails to him were erring on the side of compassion. I think that they were erring on the side of judgment. And I think, they could have handled it better.
Yeah, I looked into his Instagram page. He posted about this right afterwards, and he said, "I want this from his Instagram. I want to have uncomfortable conversations. That's how you gain understanding."
Yeah.
I didn't say anything explicit or inappropriate. If a few dozen people walk out, but there's others staying who need to know they're not alone in this journey, that's worth it to me. I felt I was alone. I was scared. That's what he's saying. He's willing to trade, basically. He's willing to make the trade-off of those people walking out for those other people who need to hear from him. That's a trade-off that he's willing to make.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that find themselves in his shoes, and there's a lot of his own fan base that are there because they identify with him as he is, and so that they value the journey that he's been on. So I think you're absolutely right that he was willing to trade the fair weather friends for some real friends. The friend in need is a friend indeed, sort of thing.
Yeah, now we have some huge guests coming up onto this podcast in the next week. We have Rick Bennett from Gospel Tangents coming on next week. And by the way, for those of you keeping track out there, that's 3 uber faithful Future General Authority co-hosts in a row, in case you were counting. We also have Evan McDonald.
Future General Authority?
I thought I could slip that through, but you're too smart for me. Yeah, sure, why not?
All right.
I'll sustain you. Yeah, I'll sustain you for sure. I'll sustain, no problem. After that, we have Evan McDonald from the Book of Evan the week after that. And we have a very, very special show lined up for December 25th with not one, but 2 special guests. This entire month is must-see, C-list podcast material. And in January, first week in January, we have Rebecca Biblioteca, who's agreed to become our first regular guest host. She's coming on January 1st. And we also have Emily from Dissident Daughters coming on January 8th. We have an all-star lineup here. But Jim, you've left them huge shoes to fill.
I'll say.
Well, I wear size 13s. I'm a very, very
they are huge.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for coming on, Jim. A big fan. Really glad that you took the time out. Really appreciate it. Wish you the very best in Canonizer and also in the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and for the Utah UPP party or wherever else life takes you.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. I very much enjoyed myself. This was delightful.
We would love to have you back again when your schedule permits, Jim. So hopefully we'll stay in touch over the years.
Sounds good.
All right. We want to give a quick shout out to Weird Alma, and thanks for his donation of his music for this episode. He did our intro and outro music. Thank you so much again for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.